Hi, it's Penny here. So recently I have been talking a lot about getting to TBR 0 and Series 0. So TBR 0 is having no physical books that I need to read or that I haven't read on my physical bookshelves. And then Series 0 for me is having caught up on all the series I've read, not necessarily finished them all because sometimes we're waiting for more books to be released, but to have read everything that I could have read. And I think by the end of September I should only have one book left on my physical reading shelf and then 20 books left to read to get to Series 0. So that's getting very close to both of those. However, the truth is, that's a lie. I also have this other shelf up the top here, this one up here. So this shelf has books on it where I haven't started the series yet, but I own books that are in the series somewhere. So basically, there are books and series that I own that I haven't read, but I hadn't started the series yet, so I didn't want to start the series yet. But now that we're getting close to TBR 0 or fake TBR 0 and Series 0, I think we're ready to look at that shelf. But what we're going to do in this video is work out, do I even want to read those books anymore? And if I do, like, what's the priority? So what I'm going to do in this one is basically go through each of those books and read the first chapter. And then from there, we'll either decide to unhaul them or we'll make a plan for when we're going to get to them. So we're going to start, I'm going to bring down all those books and we'll just see. I think there might be some different categories, but it's been a while since I looked at these books. Okay, so I think I've divided it into 4 categories. Firstly, we have these books where I have the first book in the series. I just need to decide, do I still want to read them? There's some of these I definitely do. So I think we'll start with trying a chapter of these ones. Then I also have these ones. So this one and this one are from the same series, but it's the second and third books in the series. And then this is by N.K. Jemisin, who I really love, but it's the second book in the series. I'm going to try and get the first books of these, but like, there's no chance I'm not going to want to read these. So these definitely won't be unhauls, but it's just a question of what's the priority. To be honest, I expect these ones will be very high. Then I also have these 4 books. So for all of these books, there is basically at least 3 books before these that I would need to read in the series before I read these ones. So I think I will try and get my hands on those first books and read those first chapters, and then we'll decide if I actually want to like read a whole series just to read these books. Maybe some of them I would. And then lastly, I have these 2. These 2 I'm actually probably going to put aside. This is a prequel to the Crystal Singer books. I have some of the Crystal Singer books in this stack here, and it's a book series I read when I was younger, like in my 20s, and I really loved it and I want to reread it. But I have a plan for a whole nother project to reread a lot of my favorites from my 20s. And really, it would make sense to read this when I get to that. So I think I'm actually just going to put this with my other Crystal Singer books and pretend that it's not a book that I haven't read until we get to doing that project that I want to do, that I just don't have time to do, or I don't want to do until I've sorted out the rest of these. And that's actually the same for this Gilden Fire. So this is like a little short story novella that's set in the world of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, which is one I'd like to reread, but it doesn't make sense not to reread it when I'm rereading that. So this one I will also put with my Thomas Covenant books for now. So that means we've sorted out 2 books already, and I will check in with you when I've read some first chapters. But I'm going to take it slow so I don't know when that will be. But for you, it'll be in just a second. Okay, so ignore the mess behind me. I decided to start reading through the ones that I have the first book for in order of smallest to biggest, just because it's easy to have a stack in that order. So I started with The Invader's Plan by L. Ron Hubbard. So L. Ron Hubbard was the founder of Scientology, and I picked this book up from a little free library just because I thought it would be interesting to read a science fiction by the founder of Scientology. But to be honest, I wasn't expecting it to be good. And there is an introduction by him that was very intellectual, kind of him trying to be clever. I didn't like it so much, so I wasn't expecting much. However, maybe I'm actually really excited to read this now that I've read the first chapter. Actually, there's a foreword, a preface, and a first chapter that I read. The foreword is from like a character in the world of the science fiction who is the censor, and he's basically saying that the rumors of this planet called Earth are not true. There is definitely no planet Earth. It doesn't exist. But the censorship office is still going to let this book be published just so that the author can be properly humiliated for like continuing or like encouraging these beliefs of the planet Earth. And I just really like the way that was framed. And then the preface was from the robot translator who has translated this from this alien language to English. And that was also very strange and had some weird ideas in it. And then the first chapter is from this guy who's basically in prison, and he's writing a confession letter explaining what happened with this original survey of Earth, where they this alien species will often go out and look at different planets that are inhabited, and the idea is that they just look, they don't cause any kind of disruption. If they're seen, the rule is that they should just destroy everything around them so that there's no record of them having been seen. But it sounds like something's gone wrong, and this guy's writing a confession letter about it. Honestly, wasn't expecting to be excited about this, but now I think I'm actually hyped. I'm going to put these up on a shelf, the shelf where they came from, in order of most excitedness. But at the moment, I guess this is the only one. And I thought it might be quite low, but it's actually maybe quite high. So the next book I will be reading the chapter of is Brethren by Robin Young. I think this is the beginning of a trilogy. I'm actually a bit scared because that L. Ron Hubbard one is the beginning of a 10-book series. Am I willing to get into a 10-book series? I don't know, but I could read the first one of that and get the ideas and then decide if I continued. I think I could DNF that series. This one though is more of like a classic knights, something about the Crusades. I don't really know. I saved this from some books that my auntie was unhauling, so I guess I will read the first chapter of this one and let you know what I think. So I did read the first chapter of Brethren. To be honest, I didn't really like it, or at least I don't think this is for me. It's probably written well enough, but I can see that it wants to be like a very historically accurate story of the Crusades, which is probably less of what I want. As well, like the first chapter really focused on this guy who was like the leader of the Egyptian slave army, and it was mostly focused around a battle. I don't really like war stories or stories that focus around wars or battles, and just the writing style was written in a way that felt very like at a distance from the main character, like not really a lot of emotional depth. Maybe it's just because that main character is not supposed to be very emotional. I did actually get around to reading the back, and it looks like it's going to be that guy and another guy who's a knight are the main characters. But to be honest, I'm thinking about DNFing it. Part of me feels bad about that because I feel like I saved it from my auntie's unhaul, so I should read it. But actually, like, I could just donate it. Someone else could enjoy it. So right now, I'm going to put it up here to the left of the L. Ron Hubbard one. And then nextly, I'll pick up The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I need some pronunciation help on that one. So this, I didn't actually know when I picked this up that it was a series. I'd seen a lot of people really raving about it. It's something about a boy who finds a book and then finds out that like all the other copies of this book are being destroyed or something. I don't really know. I've forgotten. But I found out this was a series when Joshana did a video about the series and how much she loved it. So there's a lot of good signs that I will love this. So let's see what I think of the first chapter. Hello. So I have read the first chapter, actually like a preface, a prologue, as well as the first chapter, because they were both quite short. And I really love this. I think it's just so beautiful. I am definitely going to, when I actually read this, like have lots of tabs and just like mark all the great lines, because already in that first bit there was some really great lines. I've remembered now that this is a book about this boy whose father takes him to the cemetery of forgotten books, and he picks out a book only to discover that all the other copies of this book have been destroyed, and it's about his search to figure out what's going on with that. But it's just written in such like a deep and meaningful way, but also like it's not too draggy or like too burdened with all that depth. So I really liked it. I think this is actually going to go up to the top of the priority because the next one down would be The Invader's Plan by L. Ron Hubbard. And that, even though it was a lot of fun, I can definitely see the humor might get a bit too much. Whereas with this, like, I just think it's really beautiful and I kind of want to read it now. But we will put it on the list because I have plenty of other things to be reading. The next book on the stack, though, is A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians by H.G. Parry. All I know about this one is that H.G. Parry is a New Zealand author, and I liked the title. It was intriguing. I actually don't remember where I got this book from. Perhaps it was from the previous year of the book fair that actually, as I'm filming this, I'm going to go to tomorrow, but I think my vlog with that will be up already. Anyway, it's in pretty good condition, so we'll read the first chapter of that, and then I'll let you know what I think. Okay, so I have read the first chapter of A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians. This one, I actually struggled a bit to decide what the first chapter was, because the first bit was set in West Africa, and then we had France, and then lastly, there was London, autumn 1779, and I decided that that was where things get into it. But the next chapter actually says England/France, and it's like 10 years on, so who really knows what the scope of this book is going to be. But I am excited about it. So the West Africa part was basically this young girl being kidnapped to become a slave, but there's like a magical component to how they enslave them, where the slave basically gets locked in their mind. They can still experience everything, but they can't act in a way that their slaver doesn't want them to. So that was pretty awful. Then as well, we had the part in France where it's made clear that commoners are not allowed to use their magical abilities if they have them, and this young boy has this bracelet, and when he accidentally tries to do some magic, it like gets really hot and sets off this alarm. And then lastly, the part in London is this lawyer man who is trying to, I guess, like work through the courts to change the laws around unregistered magicians, because it becomes clear that commoners have to be registered, but they're still not really allowed to do magic except in the case of self-defense. And this man has some ideas about how those rights of magicians should be changed. He's a commoner himself, although he still has quite a lot of privilege. So I liked that chapter because it was these two 20-year-old men very passionate about politics for the purpose of making the world better, but it still did kind of address their privilege, even though I think the characters themselves maybe aren't as aware of it as maybe they should be. And it was written in a way where the politics wasn't too boring. Like, it's kind of legal stuff, so you could see it being boring. Like, historical legal stuff doesn't sound like it would be something I like, but I actually didn't mind it. I wasn't bored. And I think I'm going to put this under the shadow of the wind, but above the Invader's Plan, just because I think it's likely that the ideas in this will align more with my beliefs, my values, than the L. Ron Hubbard one will. But like, both seem to have quite interesting ideas about the world, but it wasn't quite as beautiful as the Shadow of the Wind, although I could still see it being one that has a lot of like emotional depth to it. So I'm excited about this one. So next we have Unwind by Neil Shusterman. This one is like a YA dystopian from back in the day when YA dystopians were big. When was it released? 2008. This, I believe, is basically parents, when their children get to be 16, can decide if they would like to unwind them and basically make them into a new child. And we're following 3 runaways who basically don't want to be unwound. So I've heard mixed things about this, but again, I picked it up for free at a little library, so I guess we'll see what we think. Okay, so I have finished the first chapter of Unwind. Actually, I ended up reading 3 chapters, and I'm glad I did, because I think it gave me a better idea of the scope of things. So the first chapter was kind of following the typical teenager that you might expect to be unwound, just kind of a little bit rebellious, or like just not very successful, maybe not what his parents might have hoped him to be. So he's found out that he's going to be unwound, and he decides to run away, because basically if he can just run away and hide for 2 years, once he's 18 he can no longer be unwound. He can only be put in prison or whatever. So he just wants to try and run away and stay hidden for 2 years. Then we got the perspective of this girl who has basically been an orphan or a ward of the state, and because of like budgeting limitations, they have to empty out their state housing, and so some of these teenagers are being chosen to be unwound for that reason, and she is one of those. And then as well, the third one was really interesting, because in this one we're following this boy who actually sees being unwound as a good thing. So he's been born specifically to be a tithe for his religion, and the idea is that his parents, like, he's the 10th kid, so his parents think of it as giving 10% to the church, and so he is going to be unwound as like a tithe to the church. I'm still not entirely sure what exactly happens to some of this like body parts material that comes out of them being unwound. It seems like sometimes babies that come from unwound children are given to other families, or like they're used for people who've had injuries and need body part replacements. And I suspect we'll learn more about it in the book. I do think the way that Neil Stephenson writes is very readable. Like, I got through those 3 chapters very quickly, but I can also see, like, there's some things that are just a little bit unbelievable. The fact that, like, society really sees this unwinding as just like an acceptable part of society. It's weird. But also in the first 3 chapters, you could kind of see the 3 characters coming together, and I think that's going to be really interesting, especially because this one who's the tithe really still sees unwinding as a good thing, and the other 2 really don't. So where am I going to put this one? I think I'm trying to decide whether it goes above or below the Invader's Plan. That seems to be the decision I'm always making now. I kind of think I want to put it above just because I think this will be so readable, and also this is a 4-book series now, I think. I think originally it might have been a trilogy and then there was a 4th one added. But anyway, 4 books is much less than 10, so this would be an easier series to get through. Also just because I think these books will be super readable. So I think I'll put it above the Invader's Plan, but definitely below A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians. That title is really difficult. Anyway, the next book I will be reading is The Knife of Letting Go by Patrick Ness. All I know about this one, or I think I know about this one, is it's like a post-apocalyptic world where there's only men left, and these men can also like hear each other's thoughts, and I think that's written in quite a creative way that maybe not everybody has liked, but I do like creative writing elements when they're done in the right way, so we'll see. I think as well these men come across a woman, and that kind of starts off events. I'm not really sure what to expect of this one, so we will see, and I'll let you know in a moment. Okay, so I read the first chapter of The Knife of Never Letting Go. I think I said just letting go last time. So I read it. I didn't really like it. I feel like there is a really interesting idea here. So basically there was some kind of illness which killed off half the men and all the women. And we're following this boy who is the youngest boy because there's no more children now that there's no women. And as well, these men can all hear each other's thoughts, but also the thoughts of animals. And they just refer to it as someone's noise or like a certain animal's noise. And right at the beginning, this young boy gets a dog. He didn't want a dog for his birthday, but he got a dog and he kind of hates the dog. The dog just keeps going on about squirrels and wanting to poo, and there's squirrels talking and birds talking, and it does them. Oh, this is probably a good example. Like sometimes the noise is written in like written text within the book, and like the whole thing is written very like stream of consciousness, like a whole paragraph could be a single sentence. It just like runs on like a person's thoughts, which I think makes sense for how someone would write a story or tell a story in this world, because that's so much of how they communicate always comes with this additional noise. And there's obviously going to be a religious element to this as well, because he did run into this guy who told him off for swearing, and there was a whole kind of sermon coming along with that. But just the problem is the reading experience was not enjoyable. So even though it sounds interesting, it was just awful to read. So right now I would put this down the bottom, maybe above Brethren, but below everything else. Next, we actually have an addition, since I showed you the piles at the beginning of this blog, because I went to a book fair and I bought The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. So this is an epic fantasy. Honestly, I don't really know what it's about, but we will read the first chapter and then I'll let you know what I think. Okay, so I read the first chapter of The Grace of Kings and I liked it. I will say it's very heavy in the description, and I'm not sure if that's going to continue through the book, but it's quite thick, so I think it's quite possible. But I think as well it was just trying to get across the spectacle of this big parade procession that the Emperor was doing at the beginning. And then at this procession, what is the word? Anyway, at this thing, that's the word, this assassin tries to kill the Emperor, and we also get to meet this young boy who, there's actually a list at the beginning of the main characters, so I know he's going to be one of the main characters, he's also there with his friend. He seems to always be getting his friend in trouble. His friend's only there because he convinced him to run away from school for the day to go to this big parade. And the thing that he's taken away from this assassination attempt is that he sees the Emperor be afraid, and he's like, oh, so the Emperor is just a man. And his friend is like, don't say that. So I feel like I could really love this. I am a little bit worried because it was kind of slow to read that first chapter, even though I was enjoying it, just because the description was so heavy. But I feel like as it gets more into the plot, it might be less heavy with that description. And it still did feel like it was moving along. So this one, I think I'm going to put it, let me look at my shelf. I think I'm going to put it above Unwind, but under a declaration of the rights of magicians, just because I still don't have a feel for what the themes of this are going to be, but I am intrigued. And I think I'm in the mood for some epic fantasy, actually. Then, the next book that I'm going to try is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. To be honest, I have recently read, or kind of recently read, A Prayer of the Orange Tree and the sequel, A Day of Fallen Night, and I didn't like either of these. And then I recently saw an announcement where Samantha Shannon said she was going to rewrite this series because she feels like her writing has come so far since she wrote these. And that's scary because I don't like her writing. But so maybe I won't like this, and then she's going to rewrite it to be better or worse. I don't know. I don't even know really what this is about. Something to do with psychic powers and some kind of secret organization. I don't know. Let's read the first chapter. Okay, I read the first chapter of The Bone Season, and I think the main problem with it was very similar to the main problem I had with the beginning of A Prayer of the Orange Tree, and that is that it's just so heavy in world building. In The Priory of the Orange Tree, it's all like fantasy locations and historical events and all these different characters that are like being thrown at you, and you just can't tell what's important and what's not, and you can't really follow what all the things being referred to are because you don't even know what they are. Same with this. There's so much jargon around the different clairvoyant skills and like the whole society around that. And while some of it is explained to you, some of it is not. And again, it's just so heavy on that. However, there were some interesting things happening in that first chapter. And when I first read it, I actually thought, maybe I could DNF this one and not read it. But the longer I've sat away from it, the more I've been thinking, no, maybe I would like to learn about that world. So I think I'm going to put this one under the Invader's Plan, but above The Knife of Never Letting Go. Like, it was still an okay read, even if I'm not sure I'm going to love it. But there's a lot about all these different clairvoyants that are illegal and kind of the society that they have created and the risks to that society that are like impending. I will say it does kind of fall into that thing where they're like, oh, it's such a dangerous underground society and everyone's in danger, everyone's out to get you, and then most of the people she interacts with seem perfectly nice until the end of the chapter. Then things went terribly wrong, and that's kind of what I'm interested in. So then, actually, while I was getting motivation to film, I actually read the first chapter of this one, which is the last book I have the first book in the series of. This is another book that I saved from my auntie's unhaul pile. Obviously, it's called King Arthur, Dragon's Child, some kind of King Arthur Camelot retelling. I read the first chapter. The very beginning was very heavy on description, but not in a Ken Liu Grace of Kings kind of way, in a like, wow, this was really boring kind of way. And maybe that's just because I already know the story of King Arthur and Camelot fairly well. It did get a little bit better towards the end of the chapter where something actually happened, but for the most of it I was bored, and I think I realized while reading it that I don't think I need to read another Camelot retelling, even if supposedly this one is really good. I don't know, let me know if you disagree, but at the moment I think this is just going to go above Brethren, but under The Knife of Never Letting Go. So then, I have now managed to get my hands on all the first books from the series where I didn't own the first book, but I own later books in the series. So I think we're going to start by reading the first chapter of the Soldier's Son trilogy, of which I have books 2 and books 3. On my phone now, from the library, I have Shamans Crossing. So let's read the first chapter of that. Okay, so I've read the first chapter of Shamans Crossing, the first book of this series, and I really liked it. It really gave me kind of Farseer vibes, like Assassin's Apprentice early Fits, because we're starting again with a young boy. I will admit this first chapter is nowhere near as traumatic as the first things that happen to Fitz in the Realm of the Elderlings, but it's still like a young boy learning about the world. So it has kind of a similar feel. So we're following this young boy. He's been raised by his mother and his sisters up to this point, but his dad has just realized that he's being raised to do like tea parties and that kind of thing. And his dad is like, this is my second son who's going to have to be a soldier. I need to start getting him ready for that. And his dad seems like a fairly reasonable, smart guy. But also, so as they're traveling, his dad is telling him all about the world, and it seems like these are kind of a people of colonizers that have come in and taken this nomadic tribe. What do they call them? You know, I just read this, but I've forgotten it already. The Plains people, maybe? Anyway, these nomadic people that originally lived in this area, these new people think that they're like bringing civilization to them. But it also seems like these Plains people have some kind of like magical ability. And right at the beginning, this young boy ends up being left alone in town and coming across this young girl who is half Plains people and half his own people. And he ends up kind of getting involved in these other young boys basically trying to molest this young girl, and he tries to help out, and we learn a little bit more about what's going on. And that's really all we get in the first chapter. And I'm really conflicted about it because like it's such a familiar fantasy feel to me, and I just felt really comforted reading it, and now I kind of do just want to continue this series. So I'm tempted, because it's Robin Hobb, I know I love Robin Hobb, I'm tempted to put it right at the top. But I did look, and the average ratings for this series are really low compared to The Realm of the Elderlings. And I guess as well, she released it just before the Rainbow Chronicles, which a lot of people would say is the worst of that series, although plenty of people love it too. And I certainly loved it. And I really love Robin Hobb. But I will admit that like at the moment at the top I have Shadow of the Wind, and the writing of that was much more beautiful. But I'm going to put Robin Hobb at the top. I don't care. I'm not going to justify myself. Then, next I'll be picking up the first book in the Timara series by Naomi Novik. I have this from the library as well. I've forgotten what the first book is called though, so hang on. Oh, so the first book's just called Timara. So this is like an alternate history where we have a war in Napoleon times, but also there's dragons, and the dragons are like talking dragons that are a part of society but also bond with humans or something. I don't know if I'm going to like it, but we will try the first chapter. Okay, so I have read the first chapter of Timara, and to be honest, I don't really like it. I found the writing style really hard to get through. There's a lot of like historical and war details, maybe not that much, but just more than I care for, and I just feel like it feels like there's going to be a lot of that going forward. And even though the dragon is interesting and what's happening with the dragon is interesting, I just don't know if I can handle that writing. I'd probably prefer just to look up a summary of what happens in this series, so I'm considering doing that. So basically in the first chapter we have this ship out at sea, this naval vessel, and they come across this other French ship, and they find on the ship a dragon egg, and so one of the men from the ship has to like bond with this dragon in order to stop it going feral, and then be able to use it as like an asset in the army or in the air force. But none of the men really want to like change careers from being naval officers to being these air force guys. So for them it seems like a sacrifice, even though you would think bonding a dragon would be really cool. And so really all we got in the first chapter was that bonding thing happening. I do think Timara could be really cool, but I think also a long time ago I read the first chapter of this and I still struggled with it, so like by book 4 it's still difficult to read. So anyway, I think I'm going to put this above The Knife of Never Letting Go because the concepts are more interesting, but probably below The Bone Season because I think for me it was less readable. Then next I'm going to be reading the first chapter of Soulless by Gail Carriger. So this is a library book that I got to read the first chapter of because of having Prudence, also by Gail Carriger. My understanding is that this is a separate trilogy. Well, this is the first book in a separate trilogy, but everybody recommended to me that you should read the trilogies in this world in order to get like the full enjoyment out of them. So I'm going to try this one first. I don't know anything about it. Some kind of steampunk vampires, I just read on the back. Werewolves. Steampunk paranormal stuff. Okay, so I read the first chapter of Soulless and I didn't really like the style. I can definitely see that some people would like it. It's got a very particular tone of voice, very dry sense of humor, but just the pacing for me was a bit slow. I was somewhat confused by the way they kept referring to her as either Alexia or Miss Tarabotti. Like, just call her one thing, please stop confusing me. I was also confused when they called her a spinster and also a young lady. But the whole thing is just like she's at this ball and this vampire attacks her when she's snuck off to the library to get some food, and then that doesn't work out for the vampire because it turns out that she doesn't have a soul. So I do think that the concept of her not having a soul is really interesting, and the way it works is that if she touches some kind of supernatural creature, any supernatural things will be like nullified, so like the vampire ceases to be a vampire while she's touching him. And she really wants to work for this like supernatural society thing that goes around protecting people from supernatural threats, but they don't really think that like a noble lady should be involved. And like the concept to me is really interesting, but I was just really bored in that first chapter, and I kind of jumped through to just like a middle-ish part, and it still looks kind of the same to me, so I don't think I'm going to read it. I am a bit disappointed because I can see they described her not having a soul as being preternatural, and then this other one I have follows another girl and they called her metanatural, which I don't know what that means, but I kind of want to know. But also I just don't think this writing style is one that I would like. It's just trying to be like kind of humorous and light the whole time, and it's just not me. Even though, I mean, I guess some of the humor is kind of dark humor, but I don't know. It's just not my taste. So I think I'm going to put this, where am I going to put this? This one has to go back to the library, but this one that I had, I mean, I still think I liked it better than Timara, but probably less than the Bone Season, which is kind of surprising to me, but that's where it's going to go. Imagine I've put it up there, not over here. I'll fix it up after this. Okay, so the next one on my list was The Kingdom of the Gods by N.K. Jemisin. I've gotten the first book, The 100,000 Kingdoms, from the library so I can read the first chapter. Again, I don't really know what this is about, but I love N.K. Jemisin's stuff, and also it's something about gods, and I do tend to like stories about gods, so that's a good sign. Yeah. Okay, so I've read the first chapter of The 100,000 Kingdoms, and I feel like the first chapter didn't really get into things very much. Basically, all we've done is meet this young girl whose mother has just died, and so she's gone to her grandfather's kingdom because when she was younger, basically her mother ran off to be with this guy from this more impoverished region, I think of a different race, and basically abdicated from the throne or from her inheritance, which her grandfather wasn't very happy about. But now that her mother has died, this young girl has gone to see her grandfather, and he wants her to fight against two of her cousins to become his heir. So that's all interesting. There were little mentions of these gods, basically that there were initially 3 gods, one that ended up dead, one that may as well have died, and one that is still in power. But then it also talks about how there's now dozens of gods. So like the gods bit is interesting, but we didn't really get any explanation of it yet. But I did like not mind the writing style. I will say I know some of N.K. Jemisin's stuff that I've read, I have struggled with the writing style a little bit, but this felt quite easy to read. There were little hints of like the more creative aspects of N.K. Jemisin's writing, but it wasn't too much. It was more just like this girl putting her personality into the story that she's telling. So again, I'm conflicted where to put this because I already have a connection to the author. I am interested in the gods, but I still feel like in terms of the intrigue that it set up in the first chapter, it's definitely below Shadow of the Wind, but I might still put it above A Declaration of the Rites of Magicians just because that hint of what's going on with the gods. But I'm not sure if I'm actually being objective with that. So this one goes back to the library, and this one will go up on the shelf. Then next I'm going to be reading the first chapter of Ancillary Justice, which is the first book. Well, I think Ancillary Justice is the first book in a duology, and then this is like a spin-off companion novel. I might be wrong. Anyway, there is still quite a long hold queue for Ancillary Justice at the library. However, I managed to find on the internet a sample first chapter of Ancillary Justice, so I'm going to be reading that. All I know about this is it's a sci-fi series that a lot of people have loved. I think it's won quite a lot of awards. It says on the front of this one, Hugo, Nebula, and Arthur C. Clarke award winner. So hopefully I'll love it. But who knows? Okay, so I read the first chapter of Ancillary Justice, and I didn't know what it was about, but when I found out what it was about, I was super excited. So the sample chapter that I'd found online had this little synopsis at the top, which is basically that it is a spaceship, like the AI of a spaceship stuck in the body of a human. I love that concept. And then the actual story of it, I loved it. I loved the way this AI keeps referring to everyone as she, but will also say things like she was probably a male, but just doesn't really have the skills to tell whether someone is a male or a female, and comes from a culture that didn't really care about that anyway, so was never really bothered to learn. And just like every interaction that they have with these humans don't know that they're not a human, but everything's a little bit off. And then as well, they find the body of this space captain that they used to know when they were a ship. And there's definitely all these references to like all the stuff they used to know when they were a ship and the things they used to be able to do when they were a ship. But of course now they're just a human, so that's a disappointment, isn't it? I loved the tone of it. I loved all the concepts and the ideas, and I'm just super excited to continue this series. I did look it up though. I think actually I said before that it was a duology. It's a trilogy, and then this is like a spin-off set in the same world but with different characters. But regardless, I'm going to put Ancillary Justice, that trilogy, and I guess the spin-off at the top of the pile. This is the one I'm the most excited about. So that's a surprise, but a lucky one. So there is one more book I had on the pile at the beginning, and that is Beyond Ragnarok. So this is, I think, the first book in the second trilogy of the Renshai by Miki Zakarakit. I did look it up. I was not able to get my hands on that first book of the first trilogy, and I did see I might be able to buy it secondhand for relatively cheap online, but since we're looking at moving soon, I don't want to be ordering books and from America. Who knows how long it'll take to get here. It's just not a good idea. So I'd rather just wait. And as well, since this kind of fits with that project of reading favorite authors from my 20s, I'm just going to put that with those ones for now. And then when I finally get to that project, maybe I'll look at obtaining those books. I think that's the best way to do it. There are ebooks online, but I would have had to spend like more than it would cost for me to get all the books for the first ebook. So I'd rather just get all the books. So this one's going to go aside for now. Then what I have ended up with is basically 3 piles. Firstly, we have my priority reads. This seems to be a dangerous stack. So basically, Ancillary Justice, which I'm hyped for. These Robin Hobb ones, the Soldier's Son trilogy. I think I might try and get this on audiobook, because I did read most of the Realm of the Elderlings on audiobook, and I really liked the audiobooks, even though I've heard other people say they don't like them. But I like them, so I might see if I like the audiobooks for these ones, because my library does have them. Then I guess I'll get to Shadow of the Wind and the Inheritance trilogy. I kind of want to read both of those physically, and same with A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians, and also same for The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, even though that's going to take me forever. And I did some like simple maths the other day, thinking about like how many series could I realistically get through in a year, and like this pile is probably more than a year's worth of reading, along with all my other reading commitments. So, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I have many other series that I would like to be reading. But anyway, I also have here these 3, which I would say are not priority series, but I would like to read them for reasons. So, Unwind. I probably should try to get this on audiobook, but I also feel like it's the kind of book where I'll pay attention to it more if I read it physically, so maybe not. Same with the Invader's Plan, and actually same with the Bone Season. So these I want to get to, but I guess not until I finish the other ones. And then lastly, I think this is going to have to be my stack of unhauls. I'm mostly sad about The Knife of Never Letting Go, because I have the 3rd book, and I only just recently bought the 2nd book for $3, but only $3, so it's not that bad. I really did want to love some of these, but it's just not meant to be. So I will put them in a little free library, and maybe someone else will love them. Anyway, I guess that is me having tried a chapter of all the series that I had on my shelf that I hadn't started yet. Let me know if you've read any of these series, whether you think I'm going to like them, or like any of these ones I'm unhauling. I guess try and convince me otherwise, but I kind of feel good about getting books off my to-read list, so I'm not sure I'll be convinced. Also, do subscribe if you would like to see more bookish videos from me. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.